Stories from around the corner.
And around the country.
You're listening to All the Best.
Proudly supported by the Art Gallery of New South Wales.
You're listening to All the Best from FBI Radio 94.5. I'm Kwame Slusher. So we're going to kick the year off talking about music. First, I want to acknowledge that I'm broadcasting from stolen and Gadigal land, and pay my respect to Gadigal elders past and present, and also recognise that the area where FBI Radio is situated, Redfern, has long been a place of storytelling, strength, resistance and resilience for First Nations communities. And this recording was done on Darwell land. So I also want to extend my respect to their elders past and present. Like everyone else during lockdown, I had a COVID hobby. Well, I had several COVID hobbies, but one in particular that I had was that I picked up the ukulele. That's not to say that I picked up the ukulele in COVID. I technically had a ukulele before COVID. I never did anything with it, just sort of sat there collecting dust. But with the lockdowns and living in Sydney at the time, there wasn't much else to do. So I picked it up. I found lots of YouTube videos. I got caught in a really interesting side of Instagram with child prodigies that made me feel ashamed of myself. And, played for a while, and I wouldn't say it got very good, but it was soothing. And if you're thinking, well, why don't you just play a song? Well, it's been a long time since I've touched this ukulele. Like, literally, I don't know how long it's been, which is how long it's been. I'm not really confident to play a song for you to hear, so you just get this awkward strumming instead. And I find myself at the beginning of a new year wondering, which abandoned hobby would I like to resurrect? But music has always been a big part of my life. Both my parents are massive audiophiles. On Sundays, or anytime we had guests, there would be calypso, soca, reggae, soul, or jazz just pumping through the house. There were what seemed like hundreds of records and CDs to choose from. It came as no surprise that my brother and I would be sent to music lessons. But it would be my brother who'd become the musician. I've always been a bit more of a listener. In this episode, we dive into All the Best archives to learn about the long history of pianos, a very unique guitar, and maybe why we should start thinking of record stores as more than just places to buy music, but to be part of a like-minded community. It's not quite the Delta, but our first story takes us to South Australia to meet Don Morrison, to talk about guitar making, and why it's so hard for musicians to break the pub ceiling.
I'm in Adelaide, sitting across from Don Morrison in his living room. Don's playing a Donmo rust bucket guitar. That's Donmo, as in Don Morrison. He made it himself. And the rust bucket guitar? It has a metal body made out of old corrugated iron, the kind of metal sheeting you find on the roof of old buildings.
It looks just like an ordinary acoustic guitar in the fact that it's got a neck and headstock and 6 strings. But the body is obviously different. You can hear it's made out of tin, but it's got all the old, the dents and the scars and the aging from the old gear. This one's actually made from my grandparents' house in Broken Hill. I used to spend a bit of time up there as a kid, and I went back there recently, and the joint's falling down. It's abandoned, so I pinched some sheets of tin, and I got the neck is made from laminated pieces of an old skirting board that was there, and a bit of a stump from under the house that fell out.
Before Don had ever thought of making guitars, he left Adelaide. He was in his early 20s, had just learnt to play and started his first band, performing with his brothers Jeff and Brian. They were called the Bodgies. It was the 80s, and their take on blues music was a hit with live crowds. Melbourne was the destination, and they had momentum.
Just say you're the biggest band in Adelaide, that means nothing except in Adelaide. If you're the biggest band in Melbourne, that means you're probably one of the biggest bands in Australia.
They were relentless. Don says they played more gigs than big rock bands of the time, like the Angels. But they couldn't break through the pub-shaped ceiling. Not for lack of trying. They played gig after gig after gig.
When it was too late, we realised we're just flogging ourselves to death, and we need to stop and have a break and get creative, but we just split up instead.
Don moved back to Adelaide. He had a young family now, so he needed a proper job. He got one, a new gig at the ATO.
Had to knuckle down, we bought a house and that sort of thing. Worked in the tax office for 10 years, I reckon. And, well, it's interesting, so wouldn't do it again, but... So this is where I do most of the metal work out the back here.
When did you first make an instrument?
Probably when I came back from Melbourne, late 80s. I made an electric guitar out of the fireplace that we pulled up in our new house. It sort of worked all right, and I thought, oh, yeah. So shortly after that, then I started getting into making the metal bodies, because I really wanted, I love those old, the Dobros and the National steel guitars and that. Couldn't get them in Australia.
Donmo's guitars are unique. They're resonators, invented in the 1920s, before electric amplification. Guitar-shaped cabinets with a metal speaker cone under the hood.
My dad was a metal worker, and he didn't actually teach me how to do any of that, because he didn't want me to learn how to work with my hands, because he thought that was the crap job, better to work in an office, son. But I used to watch him when down the shed. I remember watching him welding up stuff and doing stuff, so I learnt a lot from that. So, like I said, it's just hitting stuff with a hammer is really the way that these are made.
There weren't any YouTube guides on making guitars out of buildings. There wasn't any YouTube, but the internet was kicking off. A mate hooked Don up.
So he said, I'll make you a website. And I thought, oh, all right, whatever that is.
Donmo.com.
The word started spreading a little bit around America, various places in America, and there'd be a picture of a guy playing one of my guitars. So once people in Australia found out that Americans were buying my guitars, then they became interested in them, because, anything made in Adelaide, according to an Adelaide person, is no good. You have to buy it from Melbourne or Sydney or, New York.
His rust buckets are sought after, made from copper boilers, tin roofs, fence posts and pallet wood. He's built over 500, made to order, sent them all over the world. He's made a name for himself. How did it feel to perform music on an instrument that you'd made yourself?
I never thought of it. I was always sort of critical of it. Oh, geez, that's not in tune. I must change the intonation. Or maybe wonder if that doesn't sound very good. I never really felt satisfied with it till one day I was sitting on the veranda at my house that I built myself, on a chair that I built myself, playing a guitar that I made myself, singing a song that I wrote myself. And I thought, oh, well, for better or worse, it's not a bad thing, I just wish it was all better.
Despite his achievements, Don still dreams of playing music, making it big. He even wrote a song about dreaming about making it big.
Ready to go? Yeah. I dreamt I went to Melbourne to kickstart my career. I had to get away, there was nothing happening here. I'd made a new CD, best one I'd done so far. Then it started getting played on 3RRR.
Don's living room is lined with records. Legendary blues albums sit beside his own vinyl recordings. Don's made 15 albums with bands like The Bodgies, Prawnhead and Don Morrison's Raging Thirst. He plays with his sons now.
I can complain and say, I'm still just doing pub gigs and that. But then other blokes would say, I wish I could get a gig in a pub. You know what I mean? So can't complain really. And it was all just like a dream.
You're heading to Melbourne this week, right?
You're going tonight, actually, yeah.
For CMTO and the Transom Travelling Workshop, this is Benjamin Erin.
Just like a dream.
You're listening to All the Best on FBI Radio 94.5, and I'm Kwame Slusher. That story was produced by Benjamin Erin in 2019 for the Transom Travelling Workshop, and a special thanks to the Community Media Training Organization. Earlier I talked about my parents owning lots of music, but I've also been weaning myself off of the music streaming services and buying more records. And if you've ever been to a record store, then you know there's always a bit of a vibe. Like maybe you're part of something special. Our next story is about a very particular record shop in Naarm.
In the heart of Naarm's inner north, one man has lived through the highs and lows of an industry that refuses to die. Greg, owner of Hub 301 Records and the founder of the now legendary Rhythm and Soul, has been on the front line of vinyl culture for decades. That's who I'm chatting with today.
I think I had a fascination with records from a very young age. Just naturally found myself going into junk shops around Paran in the 70s and, found myself coming home with endless amounts of records. So the fascination started really, really early, probably, maybe as far as I can remember, probably 10 years old or so.
His keen interest in vinyl landed him a job at Central Station Records, a cornerstone for the then blossoming Australian dance music scene. But after a few years, in 1993, Greg went on to carve his own path, opening Rhythm and Soul Records at the age of 22. All while the effects of a recession were still lingering. What started as a dream became a staple among dance music lovers.
I decided that I was going to open up my own record shop to my father's bewilderment. And yeah, I remember at the time it was similar to now where people were talking about recessions and all those kind of thing and interest rates, and I actually didn't know what any of it meant. I just knew how to put a 12-inch on and how it made me feel. So I just wanted to be around music and sell records and share that joy with other people that had a similar kind of passion. It was almost kind of surreal looking back at it now because it just felt like it was this party that seemed to continue not only at night, but it would begin during the day in the record store.
But as the story goes, the turn of the millennium saw the MP3 explode in popularity, permanently altering the music industry to enter a new age of digital music consumption.
There and then I still remember the first day, a kid came into my shop and mentioned MP3, and of course the first thing jumped to my mind was I thought, maybe the kid did too much acid or something or other the night before. I didn't know what he was talking about. Maybe I should have been paying more attention. And then of course, we had the kind of, the birth of computers encroaching the music business like it's never been encroached before.
The emotional fallout was real. The business devastated.
I probably hung on to, the Rhythm and Soul chapter, probably 5 or 6 years too long. But, then hindsight's a beautiful thing. And consequently, did have some financial pain that came with that kind of demise of that particular period, to the point where I was pretty much forced out.
After almost 2 decades in the business, Greg stepped away from retail, closing Rhythm and Soul. However, his passion remained, and a new chapter opened for Greg.
Yeah, my desire to sell records again in the public space seemed to be ignited again. And then in 2016, I indulged in a second chapter of music retail. Yeah, which brings us to 2025. I'm still here running the Hub story.
That's where we find ourselves now, occupying an unassuming storefront on Johnson Street, Abbotsford. Hub 301. But what about the community? The feeling of walking into a shop, digging through crates, and striking up a conversation with a fellow vinyl junkie.
Because our lives are consumed by, paying the rent and, we live in a more financial strained world that we do. We don't have the luxury to hang out at the record shop anymore. So a lot of these things have been stripped for us due to social changes, not necessarily the way humans would like to interact.
Greg believes we are a product of our environment, and that relates to the independent music scene, which continues to struggle, especially in recent years. This is a looming threat for those trying to keep it alive.
In a city like ours, which is, incredibly vibrant, it's still very hard to find sustainable work in the music business. I think it's probably, a lot harder now than what it's ever been. And even running a record label of this kind of period, it's disappointingly small when I consider, a little store like mine sometimes sells, for quite often, 10% of the world's presses of a particular release. I find that impossible to fathom, especially in a period where it wasn't unusual, in a store half the size of this in the mid-90s to sell 500 to 1,000 units of a particular release, a 12-inch with no internet in sight. So if you talk about a pressing nowadays of anything from 150 to 300 worldwide, it really is a business model for anybody to latch onto.
There's no denying the landscape has changed. Technology has made music more accessible, but not necessarily more meaningful.
I think even though we live in the digital age, I think important to understand that at the core we're human and we're social creatures. So being involved in a physical space should out-trump you being a participant in a virtual space. I find it hard to have an emotional attachment to it.
This can explain why so many music lovers, like Greg and myself, are so attached to records in 2025. Greg's still here, still believing in the magic. And maybe that's the takeaway. Vinyl isn't just about format, it's about feeling and the people who keep it alive. If you've never been to a record shop, give it a go. Ask questions, listen. You might just find something real.
But then, this wonderful replication of, that recording existing on a piece of plastic that turns around and gives you almost surreal duplicate of that, that live experience, I still find magical to today, and I don't think that magic will ever leave you. If you're able to have a clear head where music is part of your life, well then I think you're blessed, and you're one of the lucky ones.
You're listening to All the Best, proudly sponsored by the Art Gallery of New South Wales on FBI Radio 94.5, and I'm Kwame Slusher. And that story was produced by Thomas Matijevic. Special thanks to Dan Simo and Janik Rogers. In our next story, we are asked to see instruments as more than just things to be used to make music, but as having complicated histories themselves. The next story is about pianos, and a man who has made a career of tuning and restoring them.
When was the last time you saw a piano? Maybe your grandma has one, and you see it every week when you visit her and sit drinking coffee in the lounge room. Maybe you spotted a grand piano in a fancy hotel lobby. Or maybe you went to a concert to hear your favourite pianist play their heart out. But have you ever been inside a piano?
The piano's got about 2,000 moving parts in it. Typically the treble has 3 strings to a note. The top end of the bass has 2 strings, and then the lower bass is a monochord, 1 string. How many strings in a piano? Usually there's sort of between 250 and 300.
Joe Lever tunes pianos.
In a tuning, you're having to adjust every one of those 250 odd strings?
Yep, every single one.
He also restores them.
So you use a lot of steel wool. It's actually a lot of mechanical work. It's a lot of problem solving. Pianos are made of wood, felt, paper, chrome, brass. So these hammers have all got to be filed. A lot of old pianos, you can't go to Bunnings and buy a bit for it. It's 80, 100 years old.
Joe's workshop in Adelaide is filled with pianos. It's called Lever & Sons.
So a lot of pianos in here.
A lot of pianos, isn't there? I think at last count about 70. There's about another 20 out here that we're doing up for people.
Right.
And then there's another room out there with about 10 more.
Okay.
So
they're mostly uprights. At the front of the shop, the pianos are ready to sell. A lot are from Europe, mostly Germany, but there's a few from Japan. It's colourful in here too, with all the different wood that's used. There's dark European walnut, black ebony, white oak. As you walk to the back, the pianos become less finished. Many are in various states of repair.
We're constantly fixing them, aren't we? So doctors fix people, we fix pianos.
Their outer panels have been taken off and there's heaps going on inside. Every day, Joe comes to work, opens them up and dives right in. And sometimes, actually, a lot of the time, the pianos go back a really long way.
You know, the piano behind me, it's a Julius Furyk. So it's a German piano from the 1890s. So it's quite dramatic looking. It's carved. It's got swirly wood all over it, what's called figured walnut.
Turns out pianos are full of empty spaces and narrow openings. And Joe's found all kinds of things inside them.
Lots of coins, old coins. Old coins fall through the keys, so you find a lot of old coins. A lot of spiders.
But there's also this one special spot where people deliberately hide stuff. At the bottom of the piano, near the pedals, there's a panel. And with a bit of know-how and a little bit of effort, that panel lifts out.
Only maybe 6 months ago, we found a box with a lot of personal stuff, like, you know, passports and marriage certificates and some jewellery and all sorts of things. That is actually quite a romantic part of what we do, because a lot of the pianos that we restore, and, you know, some of them are up to 130 years old, you do actually find some quite weird and wonderful things in pianos.
Joe's been working with pianos for over 20 years.
Growing up in Tassie, left school pretty young. So left school when I was sort of 16, 17. I was a bit of a rat bag at school.
So he got a job at a piano shop in Hobart. And then, a couple of years later, he wanted to see Australia. So he packed up his car full of tools and piano parts, and off he went. He drove around the country looking for pianos in need of his help. He had a brick of a mobile phone and a huge pile of paper flyers.
I would go to a country town, drop off all the flyers at schools and churches and nursing homes and takeaway shops and billboards, shopping centres, and anywhere I could just get exposure.
And he just waited for people to call.
I couldn't actually phone people back. I had to get the phone call, because if I didn't get the phone call, I had no credit on my phone, because back then mobile phones were expensive.
But they did call.
There's roughly one piano in every 30 houses in Australia, on average, whereas in the country it's typically one in every 10.
Visiting old houses and working on hundreds of pianos, Joe learned a lot about history and architecture as well.
Pianos over time have very much followed architecture. If you look at old pianos from, say, the 1880s to 1900, they're quite ornate, they're elaborate, they've got lots of carving like houses were. You know, big fretted verandas, and inside there's lots of carving on wood. Into the 1910, 20, 30s, as the American bungalow style came in, so pillars on houses were straight, there was no carving. The big old carved elaborate pianos started to disappear, and they started to make pianos a little bit smaller. They were plain, straight legs, square panels, so they became a bit more boxy. And then you saw in the 40s, 50s and 60s, you had the Art Deco look, things that were rounded, quite quirky designs, and pianos followed that. And then now people build houses that are thrown together in 12 weeks, and unfortunately pianos are the same. They're now mass produced, they're made largely by machines and robots. They've lost their personality.
Joe's favourite pianos were made between 1910 and 1940.
That magnificent time in manufacturing where screws and hardware and hinges and things were largely machine made, but they were all put together by hand. The pianos from that time, they will never make them like that again, ever. It would be way too costly.
Back at his shop, Joe is doing what he can to preserve pianos like this. And if you happen to own an old piano, there's something Joe wants you to do.
Appreciate it. It's a bit like talking to somebody, you know, a person that's been around for 100 years. You know, you never know what history they've got. You don't know what they've been through in their life. I mean, the piano behind me has been around for 120 years. You can imagine the thing that's been through. You know, it was made when there was no electricity. It's been through world wars and the advent of TV and the internet, and it's been around through all of that, and it still works.
I'm Olivia Rosenman in Adelaide for CMTO and the Transom Travelling Workshop.
You're listening to All the Best at FBI Radio 94.5, and I'm Kwame Slusher. And that story was by Olivia Rosenman and was also part of the Transom Travelling Workshop, with another special thanks to the Community Media Training Organization. And if you would like to be part of our community or just want to keep up with our events or audio club, and just catch up on some of our latest episodes, then check out our show notes for a link to our Substack. And if you are hungry for more storytelling, then keep listening to All the Best for unique stories from independent audiomakers from SoCal, Sydney, and around the country. Definitely catch our live broadcast on Sundays at 9:30 a.m. on FBI Radio 94.5. We also release a brand new episode every Tuesday at 4 p.m. on allthebestradio.com, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Follow us now so you never miss an episode. All the Best would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we make these stories and pay our respects to elders past and present. All the Best is made at FBI Radio on Gadigal land in association with SYN and 3RRR on Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung and Boon Wurrung lands and 8CCC on Arrente and Warramungu lands. The All the Best executive producer is Mel Bakewell. Katarina Fraga Matos is our events and partnerships coordinator. Patrick McKenzie is our community coordinator. And a special shout out to all our amazing volunteers who helped to make All the Best possible. Shining Bird composed our theme music and Annie Hamilton designed the artwork. We're heard across Australia on the Community Radio Network, and we're made possible by the Art Gallery of New South Wales and the Community Broadcasting Foundation. You can find our full archive of almost 700 episodes at allthebestradio.com. I'm Kwame Slusher. See you next week.